In this lesson, we're going to look at how to make particles in After Effects. There's a lot of different particle systems, but we're going to start with a simple one, and then we'll look at one that allows you to use another layer as a particle system in a later lesson. So to start with, we're going to have to make a composition. Make a new composition. And we'll call it particles since we're working on a particle effect. And set it to the HD 720 setting. And a duration around 5 seconds should work pretty well for us. So go ahead and click OK. Now, in order to have a particle effect, we do need to actually put something on the stage to put the particle effect onto. But it doesn't really matter too much what we put on the stage. We can pull color from it, but by default, it's actually going to let you set the color within the effect itself. So let's start with a solid color layer. So I'm going to go to Layer, New, Solid, Command Y. The color doesn't matter too much because it's actually going to allow you to set the color from the effect settings. But if we are going to look at the origin, which allows it to actually pull the color from it later, we can set a color that we want to use for that. So go ahead and make sure that your layer is the full size of your composition. If it's not, you can click the Make Comp Size button, and that'll automatically make it the size that you need it to be. Click OK. Now we need to put a particle effect onto this layer. So make sure you leave it selected, and you're going to go up to Effect, Simulation, and this is your different particle effects and things that work sort of like particle effects. We're going to start with a basic one, which is CC Particle Systems 2. A lot of the stuff that we see in other particle systems will be similar to this, but it might be named a little bit differently. But typically they behave in the same sort of way. So go ahead and start out with Particle Systems 2, and right away you can press spacebar to preview the animation. You'll see that it's going to shoot out all these like sparks, little line particles. So automatically it's going to start animating, and what a particle system does is it sets up what's called a emitter or producer or cannon sometimes, and then the particles will shoot out of that and then behave differently depending on what physics settings you set for them. So what we'll do is we'll go ahead and start taking a look at what the particle options do. So let me go back and put this to fit. So let's start with our birth rate, which is going to be this first option here. And this is going to be how many particles get produced. The setting for this one is by frame, so every frame you get 4 particles. Sometimes it's by seconds, and then that'll give you a much larger number, but generally speaking, it's going to be the higher the number, the more particles you get. So if we lower this number, you can see that I've got mine down to 0.4 now, and I get significantly less particles. It's like 1/10 of my particles that I had before. If you increase the number, you're going to get more particles, but it's also going to slow down your render time a little bit because it's putting a lot more onto the stage. Go ahead and reset it. Below the birth rate is the longevity, and that's going to be how long the particles stay on the stage. When we get down to the particle section, you'll see that there are birth and death options. Birth would be when the particles come out of the producer. Death would be when they're fading off the screen. And you can kind of see a little bit of a tint to these edge particles. That's because they start out as yellow color and they tint to a red color and fade out as they reach their death cycle. If you want to see more of that, you can lower your longevity so they last on the screen less, and you can see that now they're fading out much quicker. If you increase it, you'll pretty much never see them fade out because they're not on the screen for long enough. Below that is what actually controls what's called the producer in this particle effect. It's where the particles actually come out of. If you expand that section, you can see you have 3 different properties, 2 for setting the size of the particle producer, and 1 for setting the position of it, all which can be animated. So for the position, you can either adjust the numbers, you can use the crosshair selection to pull it to select a new place by clicking, or you can even just drag the producer around the stage. It is a good idea to move it off of your center mark if you're going to do that, because otherwise you might accidentally drag the layer instead. But once you get this kind of crosshair off of it, you can actually physically move it around the stage. And this can be animated, and it'll actually kind of trail particles behind it as it gets animated. If you want to adjust the size of it, you can make it wider. You'll get a line of particles that way. Or you can make it taller and get a line of particles this way. Or you can even increase both and just have particles appearing across the entire screen. In this particle effect, it doesn't actually show you an outline of where the particle producer is, but in some of the other ones it does. So you just kind of have to know what area the particles are actually being produced from. And if you look at the earlier frames, it'll actually show you where that is. And I can see on this one, it looks like it's actually being produced all the way across my screen. The physics section handles how the particles behave once they get emitted. The two main properties from this are velocity and gravity. Velocity is going to be how much energy they have when they come out, and gravity is going to be the force that pulls them in a certain direction. So let's go ahead and set our velocity down to 0, and that way when they get emitted within our particle area, which is this little 3x3 circle that I have on my screen, they're not going to go anywhere other than having the gravity pull them directly down. So we get kind of a waterfall effect out of it. You can increase your gravity, you can decrease your gravity to make it go slower. Or you can even reverse the gravity if you want and use a negative number, and that way they'll get pulled upwards instead of downwards. Go ahead and reset my gravity. You can also set your gravity to be 0. Without any velocity, you're just going to see the particles kind of staying in the one area of your producer. Or if you set the velocity back up to 1, now the particles are going to shoot out in all directions and not have any gravity to pull them down. Sort of like you're flying through stars. Let me go ahead and reset all my settings. Below gravity is your resistance, and what the resistance does is it just kind of dampens everything else. It almost makes it look like you're zooming out of the particle system a little bit. So as I increase it, you'll see that everything becomes weaker, and it looks like we just kind of backed up away from it a little bit. The direction actually doesn't do too much on the explosion right now. You'll see when you adjust it that it looks like it's kind of spinning it along the y-axis at a little bit of a tilt. But if you actually try to animate it, it's not like it's going to spin around while it's animating. It actually just kind of stays still. In some of the other property or some of the other animations, which will change the way these properties work, it will do a little bit more. And then this extra property down here does absolutely nothing for explosion, but on other animations, it'll actually behave in different ways. So go ahead and try out some of these other animations. Try making adjustments to these different properties within the physics section and see how it changes the way that the particles get emitted.